May 11, 1960. A quiet street in a suburb of Buenos Aires called San Fernando. A man stepped off a bus, just like he did every single evening, at almost exactly the same time. He had been doing this for nearly a decade, living under a fake name, working an ordinary job, raising 4 sons who had no idea who their father really was. As he walked toward his house, a stranger stepped out of the darkness and said 2 simple words in Spanish. Momentito, señor. One moment, sir. The man panicked and tried to run. Within seconds he was on the ground, dragged into a waiting car. For 15 years, this man had vanished from the face of the earth, presumed dead by some, hunted relentlessly by others. His real name was Adolf Eichmann. And the men who had just captured him, on that quiet street, were about to put him on trial for one of the largest roles any single human being played in the Holocaust. Adolf Eichmann was born on March 19, 1906, in Solingen, Germany. There was nothing remarkable about his early life. An unremarkable student, a failed engineering apprenticeship, a series of ordinary sales jobs that led nowhere in particular. In November 1932, he joined the SS, the elite paramilitary organization that would eventually become responsible for enforcing the most horrifying policies of the Nazi regime. He rose steadily through its ranks, not because of brilliance or charisma, but because of something far more chilling: his almost obsessive talent for logistics, bureaucracy, and organization. When Germany annexed Austria in 1938, Eichmann was sent to Vienna with a specific mission: find an efficient way to force Jewish people out of the city. He built what he considered a model deportation system there, one so effective that his superiors took notice immediately. By 1939, he was given a position within the Reich Security Main Office, the central security apparatus of Nazi Germany, working specifically within the section dealing with what they coldly referred to as the Jewish question. In January 1942, Eichmann attended a meeting near Berlin that would define the rest of his life and the deaths of millions of others: the Wannsee Conference. There, top Nazi officials formalized what they called the final solution: the systematic extermination of the Jewish population of Europe. Eichmann was appointed to coordinate the identification, the assembly, and the mass transportation of millions of people from across occupied Europe to Nazi death camps, where they would be murdered. He carried out this assignment with a level of organizational efficiency that historians have called almost industrial. Between 3 and 4 million people were transported to extermination camps under systems Eichmann helped design and operate. Close to 2 million more were murdered through other means connected to his work. He never personally pulled a trigger or opened a gas chamber door. He simply made sure the trains ran on schedule, the paperwork was processed, and the numbers reached their destination. It was precisely this distance from direct violence, this bureaucratic, almost office, job approach to mass murder, that would later make him one of the most chilling and debated figures to ever stand trial for the Holocaust. When the war ended in 1945, Eichmann was captured by American forces, but his captors had no idea who they were actually holding. He gave a false name and was processed as a low-level prisoner. In January 1946, recognizing how close he was to being discovered, he escaped from the American detention camp before authorities could connect him to his real identity and bring him before the Nuremberg tribunal. alongside the other major Nazi war criminals. For the next several years, Eichmann lived as a ghost, moving between identities, hiding on a farm in Germany, working under a borrowed name in the British occupation zone. In 1950, with help from a network connected to a sympathetic Catholic bishop, he obtained false papers and sailed for South America under a new identity, Ricardo Clement. He settled in Buenos Aires, Argentina, a country that had quietly become a refuge for thousands of fleeing Nazi war criminals. Smuggled in through a network historians later called the Rat Route. His wife and sons joined him 2 years later. A fourth son was born in Argentina. For nearly a decade, Ricardo Clement worked an unremarkable job at a Mercedes-Benz workshop, lived in a modest house, and blended into ordinary life. To his neighbors, he was simply another German immigrant trying to start over. But Eichmann was not as forgotten as he believed. Nazi hunters across the world, including the famous Simon Wiesenthal, had never stopped searching for him. Then, almost by accident, the breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A German Jewish Holocaust survivor, living in Argentina named Lothar Hermann, had a daughter named Sylvia. In the mid-1950s, Sylvia began dating a young man who introduced himself as Klaus Eichmann. A young man who, according to later accounts, boasted openly about his father's role in the Nazi regime. Lothar Hermann, suspicious, sent his daughter on what amounted to a quiet investigation. She visited the family home and was greeted at the door by an older man who claimed to be Klaus's uncle. But when Klaus arrived shortly afterward, he addressed the older man as father. Hermann passed this information to Fritz Bauer, a German prosecutor and Holocaust survivor who, fearing that German authorities might tip Eichmann off if approached through official channels, made the extraordinary decision to bypass his own government entirely and pass the intelligence directly to Israel. By 1960, Israeli intelligence had confirmed it. Ricardo Clement of Garibaldi Street, San Fernando, was Adolf Eichmann. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, knowing Argentina had a long history of refusing to extradite Nazi war criminals, made the decision to bypass any legal request entirely. Mossad would simply go in and take him. Director Isser Harel personally oversaw the operation from Buenos Aires. 11 agents were sent into the country under false passports. Among them a disguise specialist, a forger capable of producing flawless travel documents, a doctor to keep Eichmann sedated and alive during transport, and even a woman posing as a housewife to maintain the appearance of an ordinary family, living quietly in a rented villa. For weeks they tracked Eichmann's every movement. When he left his house, where he ate lunch, what bus he took home, and at exactly what time each evening he arrived back at Garibaldi Street. On the evening of May 11, 1960, agents Zevi Malkin and Rafi Eichmann waited in a parked car for nearly 2 hours. When Eichmann finally stepped off the bus, Malkin approached him with the now famous phrase, Momentito, señor. Eichmann bolted, but within seconds he was overpowered and forced into the back of the car. For 9 days, he was held in a secret villa converted into a makeshift holding cell, guarded around the clock, while Mossad arranged a way to smuggle him out of the country undetected. Agents disguised him as an injured Israeli airline employee recovering from a head injury and walked him directly through the airport. On May 20, 1960, Adolf Eichmann boarded a commercial flight to Israel. Drugged, dressed in an El Al uniform, surrounded by the very men who had hunted him for years. The operation triggered an international diplomatic firestorm. Argentina formally protested to the United Nations Security Council, accusing Israel of violating its national sovereignty by abducting a man from its territory without legal process. The dispute simmered for months before eventually being resolved diplomatically. But none of that controversy slowed what happened next. On April 11, 1961, Eichmann's trial began in Jerusalem before a special tribunal of the Jerusalem District Court, with Israeli Attorney General Gideon Hausner leading the prosecution. It would become one of the most closely watched legal proceedings of the entire 20th century. An estimated 500 journalists from around the world traveled to Jerusalem to cover it. Filmed extensively by an American broadcasting company, footage from inside the courtroom was flown across the Atlantic and broadcast on evening news programs throughout the United States, bringing the full horror of the Holocaust directly into living rooms in a way no previous Nuremberg proceeding ever had. Unlike Nuremberg, which had relied heavily on written documents and paperwork, Eichmann's trial placed Holocaust survivors directly at the center of the courtroom. Witness after witness took the stand to describe, in personal, devastating detail, exactly what had happened to them, to their families, and to entire communities that no longer existed. Eichmann sat through nearly all of it behind reinforced bulletproof glass. A small, balding, unremarkable-looking man who one journalist, covering the trial famously, described as looking more like a bank clerk than one of history's most efficient bureaucrats of mass murder. Throughout the entire trial, Eichmann did not deny what had happened. He did not deny his own role in making it happen. His defense rested entirely on a single argument that would go on to spark decades of philosophical and historical debate. He claimed he was simply a loyal civil servant, following the orders of a totalitarian system, with no personal authority to question or refuse what he had been told to do. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, who covered the trial and later wrote one of the most famous books ever written about it, coined a phrase that has outlived the trial itself. She called it the banality of evil, arguing that monstrous atrocities did not always require monstrous men, sometimes simply ordinary bureaucrats willing to follow instructions without question. On December 15, 1961, the Israeli court delivered its verdict. Adolf Eichmann was found guilty on all 15 criminal charges, including crimes against humanity and crimes against the Jewish people. He was sentenced to death, the only death sentence Israel has ever carried out in its entire history. His legal team appealed. The appeal was denied. In the final hours before his execution, Eichmann was allowed to write letters and meet briefly with a pastor. He showed no visible breakdown, no public confession of remorse witnessed by those around him. Just before midnight on May 31, 1962, Eichmann was led to the gallows at Ramel prison. Standing directly behind him was Rafi Eitan, the same Mossad officer who had helped capture him on that street in Buenos Aires 2 years earlier. According to accounts given decades later by people present that night, Eichmann's final words were almost defiant. He reportedly declared his loyalty to Germany, to Argentina, and to Austria, the 3 countries he said he felt most connected to, before saying he was ready, and that he believed in God. Some accounts describe an even colder final line. a statement expressing hope that those witnessing his death would, in his words, follow him soon after. At just after midnight, on June 1, 1962, Adolf Eichmann was hanged. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered over the Mediterranean Sea, far beyond Israeli territorial waters, ensuring no grave could ever exist for anyone to visit. Eichmann's trial changed something permanent in how the world understood the Holocaust. Historians often point to the global television coverage of his trial as the exact moment public consciousness of the Holocaust shifted. From a chapter in a history book to a living, documented horror, told directly by the people who survived it. The man who had spent a decade hiding as an ordinary factory worker in Argentina became, in his death, one of the most studied and debated figures of the entire 20th century. Proof that the machinery of genocide did not always require monsters. Sometimes, it only required a man willing to make sure the trains ran on time. If you want to hear the story of the man who escaped the very same Mossad operation that captured Eichmann, the Nazi doctor, known as the Angel of Death, who slipped away just as the net was closing in, that video is coming next. Subscribe to Ordinity so you don't miss it.